Hey everyone. It's been too long. I think it's been like a week since my last Facebook Live, something like that. I can't, maybe it was Thursday. Doesn't matter. It's been too long. So I'm back, and today I want to talk about the 25th Dynasty and King Taharqa, which will be pretty fun. But you know, until then, let's find out how everyone's doing. Who's getting back into the world? Anyone out of lockdown? I assume a lot of people are going about their lives. I'm going to the grocery store with my mask on in California right now. If you have your mask on, you can go out and go to grocery stores and stuff like that. But a lot of the other shops are still closed down. But you know, everyone's just waiting to get out, right? But this virus is still out there. So I don't pretend to understand. From Crete, emerging from lockdown. Hello from New Jersey, still being careful. Hi, you guys. Hi, Ricky. Hi, Beth. Hi, Charlene. Hi, Karen from the UK. Awesome. Jordy, Ohio is technically out of lockdown, still wearing masks. Yeah, I have a favorite mask, but it smells today, so I have to wash it. Semi out, live in a resort that is open with restrictions. Turkish. Hi, Donna. Hi, Jorge. Gradually. Garden center. I love the garden centers. It's the best, right? At a hospice, working the entire time. Yeah, you can't, the hospice work ain't gonna stop, is it? Florida. Work has been staying at home through June. Out of lockdown in France, same as California. Well, Andy, none of the shops are open here, at least not many, but a lot of their restaurants are opening back up. But I'm so used to cooking now, I don't know if I'm going to be okay with the restaurant thing. Let's see what I have. So two things in my life have changed in drastic ways, and one that we're cooking like crazy, and we don't do takeout. We did pizza once and we all kind of felt sick to our stomachs, and so we're going to continue to eat food at home, though barbecue is a game changer. We do bring that into the home. And then the other drastic change to my life is I'm walking and walking and walking and walking, and I have this program on my phone called Seek that you can put in front of any plant, and it'll tell you what the species of the plant is, if you can get the leaves and the flowers and all this stuff. And that's been pretty fun, but my son hates it. He's like, no more talking about plants. He doesn't want us to do any more discussions of plants. So, oh, I'm glad everyone's doing so well. So let's get to the topic of the day, which is what I talked to my class about today, and that is Taharqa. 25th Dynasty. I added him last minute because you know I'm writing this book called The Good Kings, or maybe I'll call it The Perfect Kings. You guys let me know. But it's about authoritarianism that presents itself as the best option, the good option, the pure option, the option that's fighting against evil, and that the Egyptians did this better than anyone else, right? And my kings are Khufu, Senwosret III, Akhenaten, Ramses II, and now I'm adding Taharqa of Dynasty 25 because I want to see if the Ramessid kings were Canaanite peoples from way back when who Egyptianized, and you have kings named Seth, and they're like these Canaanite guys who are able to take the kingship of Egypt. But you don't really see it. Nobody thinks of Ramses II as foreign or of foreign origins. At least not many of us talk about it that way. Or mercenary origins, Levantine origins. We don't generally. So it's a little harder to see there. But for Taharqa of the 25th Dynasty, everybody sees him as completely foreign. And Egyptologists racistly put the 25th Dynasty into the Third Intermediate Period, a time period of decentralization and discord, rather than into the late period, a time period of probably just as much decentralization and discord as the 25th, but you know, it's ruled by Northerners, and so they get to be the late period in a different time. But the 25th Dynasty is this crazy thing that it's like a little blip of imperialism coming from Sudan that comes into Egypt, and the kings set themselves up as these guys who were going to rule Egypt more purely, more religiously, piously than any Egyptian before them. And of course, it's more complicated than that. Thus, the book that I'm writing, and the history is certainly more complicated. But it brought up to me this crazy thing. Here, I'll just show you my slides to give you an idea. I know you can only see it when I tilt it, but I've got some grain here. There's some grain, and there's some gold. Seti the First worshiping a bark shrine of Amun-Re of gold. But the point is that Egypt, in my opinion, is not imperial. Egypt has hegemonies over the Levant and hegemony over Nubia. It goes and it sets up its fortresses and its power stations, its army bases, gets all the gold out of Nubia and other stones, gets all of the trade routes and other things it needs from the Levant and trees from the Lebanon. So it sets up those areas, but it doesn't ever create an imperial system that's based on growth, that's based on chattel slavery. It doesn't do that. It's not a system that's based on multiple ethnicities and religions and identities coming together into one government system. It doesn't do that. It's a nation state, almost the first nation state in a way, even though, of course, it's too early to start using the term nation state. But if you come into Egypt, you have to be Egyptian. And because Egypt creates this divine kingship that is so safe for the Bronze Age that it can last for generation after generation after generation. Dynasties can go on for like 250, 300 years. It proves divine kingship for its people. So they show themselves as these perfected things, God kings, clothed in gold, and they show all of the grain that Egypt can produce. So that's the Bronze Age reality. Then the Bronze Age falls. And the Iron Age happens, and the age of empire has begun. The first millennium BCE is all about empire. And what do the empires want? They want all of that gold. They want all of that grain. But more than that, and this is the part that I'm working on in the book, they want that ideology of kingship that the Egyptians have perfected. They want that, they're so hungry for that notion of the God King that is infallible, that is chosen by God, that is predestined to be there, that cannot be toppled, where regicide is rare, at least from what we know. They're hungry for this. And so you see these people coming into Egypt to try to claim that thing that the Egyptians have perfected. In 25th Dynasty, particularly kings like Piety or Taharqa, they come in and they try to be more Egyptian than the Egyptians before them, and in their imperialism. And then you see some people getting it and some people not. Like the Assyrians, they don't get it. They don't come in and try to show that they can get along with Egyptian religion, or that they need to be pious, or they need to worship at the temples. They just come in and sack and lay waste. We still remember the Assyrian Empire as being a very cruel empire, and not just because we read 2 Kings in the Bible. I don't think they set themselves up ideologically as cleverly as the ancient Egyptians did. Persians were more clever. Persians set themselves up with a good versus evil schema, set themselves up as protectors of the rule of law and what is right and good. But think of those men that needed what Egypt had. Alexander the Great had to come in and go to Siwa Temple out in the Western Desert to be proven by Amun-Re a god. Julius Caesar is killed on the steps of the Senate, arguably because he's too close to Egypt, and he's too close to this god kingship. And Mark Antony, after him, just goes all in. He's like, yeah, I want some of that, and tries to connect to that god kingship. So the stuff for the 25th Dynasty is pretty interesting, because in all of their texts for this 25th Dynasty, or better stated, Kingdom of Kush, I think that's more appropriate, because the 25th Dynasty is just a small part of the time period that the Kingdom of Kush rules over this area in modern-day Sudan between the 2nd and the 6th cataracts. The Kingdom of Kush presents itself as this incredibly pious ruling group. And when Pianki comes in and drives away those feather wearers, that's what he calls the Libyans, that he takes under his control and makes deals with, but tries to get Egypt under his control. He comes in as a pious religious leader, and he doesn't allow some of those Libyan rulers into the temples where he's reconsecrating and remaking what had been ignored in terms of religious ritual, because those Libyans had eaten fish and were impure. So he's going to be more pious than you can possibly imagine, which brings up the phrase, there is no zealot like the convert, right? And you see the same things with Taharqa. So when Taharqa talks about taking over certain areas and getting control over Egypt, he also brings it into, let me see if I can find a text. Let's see. Yeah, here. He puts it into a religious light. So here, I'll read an ancient text. I know it's exactly what you guys want. So let's see. So this is His Majesty is one who loves the God. He spends the day and lies by night seeking what is useful to the gods. I mean, if that's all you do, good for you. Do you guys out there, do you think, you just thinking all day, what does God want from me? Some of you maybe do. I know I do not do this. Building their temples fallen into decay, giving birth to their statues as the primeval times, building their storehouses, endowing altars, making them with offerings of any product, making their offering tables of fine gold, silver, and copper. So he is doing everything that the gods want. This is a time period in which religion is really at the forefront of culture in the 25th dynasty. And the piety of kingship is expressed very overtly. And everyone gets on this train, it seems, in the 25th dynasty, particularly in Thebes. So there are men like, important men like Mentuemhat, the mayor of Thebes, an Egyptian, Harwa, other people who are all engaged in this overt religiosity. It's become fashionable to show their religion, to show their piety. And so, and this is from class today, and I said to the class, I said, it's interesting the way religion is obviously associated with power. No one's going to ever say that it's not. But there are some time periods and there are some ruling structures that function better with an overt religious zealotry. Not fanaticism exactly, but what's the word I'm looking for? This is tough. Like, let me see if I can talk my way into it, because I'm going to compare a whole lot of people. Think of Putin and his connection with the Orthodox Church in Russia and how that is an absolute foundation of his authoritarianism. Think of Duterte and his connection to the Roman Catholic Church, yes, but also his connection of almost an ancient Egyptian, like good versus bad. I'm going to take the vile drug dealer and kill him. And there's this battle of light versus the dark, but he's overtly religious. And you see that there. You see it in Hungary and Poland. A Christianity that is much more, what's the word? Help me with this word. No, not doctrinal, and it's not evangelical, because it's not going to be that. And it's not, what's the word? Because fanatical is not going to do it, because the fanatics are on the outside. These are people who are pushing I guess I could say this, but it doesn't really work either. Fundamentalist. But fundamentalist and fanatic, these are things they're often on the fringes of the religious center, the religious core. I guess the word I'm looking for is pious. But it's a piety that is easily exclusionary. So you can see what the light is versus the dark. And where I would go with this, and I was talking with my grad students afterwards, is that some rulers, authoritarian rulers, imperial rulers, governments, are better at setting themselves up as the crusader, no, I'm using that purposefully, for the light, against the evil, against the dark. and are remembered for it. So we remember the ancient Egyptians for the most part, unless you grew up having a Seder dinner in which they enslaved you. For the most part, you remember the ancient Egyptians as good, as not being overtly, dramatically cruel. Whereas you think of the Assyrians as bad, or the Mongols as bad, or Vlad the Impaler as bad, and like the Belgian African Empire, you know, hearts of darkness. There is no real light in this imperial system, no ideological foundation, whereas the British or the French did a much better job of creating an ideological foundation that they were doing the right and good thing. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that these regimes, authoritarian systems, imperial systems were good. I'm just asking what makes these systems better at getting people to think they are good. So it's all about ideology. It's all about propaganda. It's all about belief systems. And thus it's all about Taharqa today in class, and how he, to gain power in Egypt, needed to use the ideology of the powerful that had been imposed on his own people for generations, and then took that ideology and used it against the Egyptians themselves to take them over. So it's a pretty extraordinary scheme. And if it hadn't been for the Assyrians to invade, Taharqa's Kushite empire probably would have lasted in Egypt for many more generations than it did. But this is the age of empire, and so the Assyrians come down, and as you can read in your Second Kings, they took control over Egypt, and they kicked Taharqa's butt, and he had to abandon his wife and his sons and hightail it back to Sudan. But while he's in Egypt, he is always setting himself up as this pious protector, and he's a pious protector of a system that colonized his own people, in many cases quite cruelly. So I brought up some interesting comparisons. You guys can tell me if you think this is a little crazy. But it would be like Catholicism, Christianity, brought into Native American lands and imposed on Native Americans through colonialism, re-education, but through this ideological understanding that you're saving souls, you're doing the right thing. That's what the Spanish thought when they came here. It's what many Protestants thought in American Manifest Destiny, right? That you're supposed to give this Christianity to the Native Americans. And then you see in some Native American political groups that Christianity then used and imposed back on their own people, because it's the religion of control and power. And that works for Native Americans of North America or Central America. It's going to work very well for Mexico. It's going to work for Guatemala. And so you see people, even though that religion has been often quite cruelly imposed on them, in a colonial smackdown of some kind, that the oppressed cannot remove themselves from the power codes of the oppressors. They have to still engage in that language. And so Taharqa, when he starts talking about how awesome he is and how God has chosen him and building all of these temples, he's building them with Egyptian hieroglyphs. And he's building them because he's not using his language, he's using the Egyptian language. He doesn't write it in the language that they're speaking at that time in Sudan. He's writing it in this crazy old-fashioned Middle Egyptian that no one is speaking, because it gives him a gravity and a weight and a formality. It's like Joseph Smith writing the Book of Mormon in Elizabethan English, because he grew up with the Book of Kings, and to write it in the English that he was speaking didn't have the weight and the heft that he needed for the religion that he was trying to create. So he had to go back a couple hundred years and use an older English. Well, Taharqa of Dynasty 25 is not just going back a couple hundred years, he's going back a good 1,000 years or more, and using a language that is so stilted and so formalized that these texts that he's putting up, hardly anyone would have been able to understand them. I had to read some of these in graduate school, and the grammar is wonky and bizarre and strange, but it gives you an idea that he couldn't take those hieroglyphs, use them phonetically, use the African language that he was speaking, and put that up on the temple wall. Instead, he uses the Egyptian language, goes back to a really old version of it that very few people will understand, and uses that to communicate his power internally in Sudan, in his Kushite region, and in Egypt as well. And then I had this image, which I really like. See if I can get it. Oh yeah, you can see that. So there on one side, with the higher ears, the darker stone, that is Amenemhet III of Dynasty 12, dating to around, let's say like 1800 BCE. And that image of the lighter stone, that is Taharqa with the double uraeus. And we're going to date that to around, I don't know, like 750 BCE. So whole lot of years between the two of those images. And it's not a direct copy, but he's trying very hard to be like this lion king as was. And I told the students, I'm like, don't think if it looks different that he doesn't know what he's doing. It's not because he can't, or his sculptors can't, or they're not able, or they're too naive to make it exactly like that old one. It's that they want to have their cake and eat it too. They have to have their cake and eat it too. They have to pull in some of the old, but not too much, and then pull enough of themselves so that they can still be identified. It would be like, we're always talking about the forefathers who wrote the Constitution and in this country, right? That's our ideological underpinning. And yet you don't see presidents putting on tight pants, tights, and wearing a gray wig and a cravat, right? Because it would be ridiculous. You would laugh at them. It would be strange and bizarre. But you do see them mentioning them. You see them being very conservative in their hair and their garments, and always wearing ties and these things. So there is like a kind of archaism, but if they do too much, then it'll be ridiculous. They'll be laughed at. So you have to include the modern day and the modern style, the modern fashion, and then you put it together with the ancient fashion. So then you're not quite so laughable. So I'm sure Taharqa could have done it like Amenemhet III did, but that was not his intent. He's there to make the throwback and to make you know it and see to call it out, and then to do it in his particular Kushite way. That has to be maintained. Okay, so we'll end it on this thing here. So all these guys, this is the power of Egypt. Everyone has to Egyptianize. Everyone does. So you have Susenes the First of Dynasty 21, a sea person, as was a Libyan in origin, after he was a sea person in origin, and he has to Egyptianize. You have the Libyans of the 22nd, 23rd, 24th dynasty all having to Egyptianize. You have Taharqa Egyptianizing. You have the 26th dynasty, Amasis, Egyptianizing. You even have Darius Egyptianizing. You see that standing statue bottom center. That's Darius wearing his Persian garb, and yet he's standing upon an Egyptian-style throne with Egyptian hieroglyphs and Egyptian enemies. Darius knows he can't make himself look like a Persian king. They'll laugh his ass off. He will be made ridiculous in his Persian homeland. So he shows himself in his regular Persian garment, but he's standing upon the nine bows. He's showing the Egyptian hieroglyphs. He's taking what he can of the ancient Egyptian system to claim it, and to claim its great ideological heft of being the good guy, the good authoritarian, the good king. And then, of course, Alexander the Great did this, and all of the Ptolemies who followed after him did this as well. And the Ptolemies, this is no empire, right? It's returning Egypt to the nation state as was, if that's an appropriate term. Even though it's Greeks ruling, they're ruling Egypt within Egypt, not from outside. And so they have to go all in with the crowns and the outfits and the religion and the temple building and everything. So yeah, I think in the discussion next time, we're going to read an Assyrian text about victory and put it next to an Egyptian text about victory. And then I was thinking about putting it next to a Duterte speech from the Philippines about victory over drug lords, and then seeing what kinds of things are similar and what kinds of things are different. And I think that we'll see that there's going to be, for Duterte and Taharqa, or whoever is styling themselves as Egyptian, a foundation of religious ideology that is quite nuanced, that when you're laying waste to somebody, you're doing it for a reason, and you're doing it for God, you're doing it for the light, you're doing it for good. So much of the Assyrian texts don't mention religion or God hardly at all, and it's just about laying waste and taking control and doing cruel things to people. And without that religious foundation, I think the Assyrians still have this reputation to this day for being cruel kings. Again, my point is, they're all cruel kings, but who is able to sell it better? They're all authoritarian. They're all taking control. It's not like, Genghis Khan was the bad guy and Alexander the Great was the good guy, but one was certainly way better at selling what he was doing than the other one. So I'll end it there, and I guess I'll call this Taharqa and the ideology of rule, something like that, religious ideology of rule, and look at some of your comments. The Duterte campaign, oh yeah, you're right, dry run for the campaign we are currently living with. It's interesting comparisons, because you can talk about cruelty, but if you're doing it for the light, then you're fine. Look at the Spanish Inquisition, right? Thanks, you guys. I'll try not to do such a big break in between Facebook Lives, because I know that everyone likes these things. And I like them too. They help me think, even though you saw a lot more of that thought pattern here than normal. I try to have my thoughts a little bit more collected. But let me know what you think about what words would work for this kind of religious system, because it's not fanaticism. Zealotry could work. It's got to be something that works on the inside of the system. So let me know. And maybe I'll start looking at some religious theory too. See what I can find there. So signing off. Everyone take care and enjoy the weather. It's beautiful here, and enjoy your long walks, right? I have to assume that you're going on long walks like I am. Get that Seek program, start learning all of the plants. And, I'm never going to become a gardener, but I can tell my husband what to plant. Ha-ha. So, however you find sanity in this world, go off and do it. And we will talk soon. Ciao.